Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is episode 2 of Office Hours on YouTube Live. So really excited to talk to you today about resume fireworks. Not that we can really make our resume jump off the page and explode off the page, but I want to talk to you about how to keep eyes on a resume and keep people really engaged in reading your resume and make it a bit more dynamic. So I'm going to take your questions, so feel free to enter them in the chat anytime. I will circle back to them or answer them as we go if they relate to what I am going to talk about in terms of keeping eyeballs on resumes. And yeah, I'd love to hear where everybody's logging in from. So if you want to let me know who's here in the chat, that would be great too, so I can say hello. And while you're doing that, I want to get started. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is how to really draw readers' attention to your results on your resume. So your accomplishments, the really important stuff on your resume, the meat, so to speak. So just for a refresher, or maybe this is new for some people, the structure that I propose for building your professional experience section is for each job, you list the job, you list the company, you also put the date range on the right-hand side, and you follow that up with a small paragraph that gives context to the actual job itself. So the duties, the responsibilities, the overall mandate of the role, that's what you use a small paragraph for. And then following up with that is when you're going to use bullets to really highlight accomplishments, whether they're quantifiable or not quantifiable. Doesn't really matter. Obviously, quantifying accomplishments is great if it makes sense, but really what you want to do is communicate the impact of your work, of your accomplishment, whether it be with numbers or through words. So you're reserving the bullets, typically 3 to 5. You're reserving that for your accomplishments. And and you're reserving it for your best accomplishments. So how do we get the reader's eyes to draw right to those results? So you may have heard of an approach to writing accomplishments called the CAR approach. So CAR approach. And the C stands for context, A is action, R is result. So that is pretty good. But what is even better, in my opinion, and what I do when I'm writing resumes is I flip it on its head and I go for the rack approach. So we're leading with our results and then we're following up with some action and context. So how we arrived at that result. So just to give you an idea of how that would look, let's say you increased sales 25%. So we've got a good quantifiable accomplishment there. So with the CAR approach, how a bullet would read is, let's say, developed strategic account plan focused on high volume markets, resulting in an increase to sales of 25%. So it kind of takes us a little while to get to the actual result. What I'm suggesting is go with the rack approach, which is just leading with that result. So increase sales 25% by developing a strategic plan focused on high volume markets. It's shorter, it's sweeter, it's punchier, and it gets to the good stuff quickly. So that's what I recommend, is going for that rack approach. So when you're writing accomplishment bullets, go results, action, then context. And often the action and context, it's the same thing. So don't stress too much about the AC part. Just give some context to how you arrived at that result. So it's not just a result hanging out there in a bullet without any actual clarification. Okay, so let's talk about parts of the resume that make eyes roll. Before I get into that, hi everyone who just joined. If you want to say hi in the chat, I'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions, similarly, please put them in the chat as well. Happy to take your questions. And so parts of the resume that make eyes roll. Okay, so let's talk about the obvious stuff, which you've probably already heard a lot about. The obvious stuff that makes eyes roll on a resume is, for starters, a career objective. So that is like a really old resume standard. I don't know why it was even part of a resume, because it comes across as very self-serving. And as you know, when we're writing resumes, we want to write them from a place of, this is the value that I can bring to the table, right? And so a career objective is just not something we want to use anymore. And we want to use a professional summary instead. So a short paragraph at the top of our resume, which really highlights our key attributes and strengths and value that we can bring to our target role. Another thing that makes eyes roll, which you've probably heard too, is references available upon request at the bottom of your resume. So if you get to a point in an interview stage where references are requested, it will be expected you can provide them. So it's total given, total unspoken, unwritten rule. You should be able to provide references, so you don't need to say that in your resume. Responsible for is something that I see a lot on resumes. Maybe we're not talking about it enough as resume writers or career coaches, but responsible for is a very, like, it's a boring way to tee up your duties or your accomplishments. Of course, you're responsible for it if you're claiming it on your resume. So go for using more active verbs. And what I'm going to do at the end of this stream today is I'm going to include 2 links to 2 great lists of action focused or active verbs that you can totally use, steal. Like, those are really great verb lists that I always recommend to use when you're writing your resume. And this will make a huge difference in terms of making your resume more dynamic. And I unfortunately can't put the links in the chat because I realized after the fact, after last week's stream, that YouTube doesn't let links go through in the chat. So they just get blocked completely. So I will put them in the description of the video when it's done processing, and you can review the recording or just the description. So let's talk about the subtle things that make eyes roll when reading a resume. One thing is, and this is super subtle, you may or may not be doing this on your resume, but kind of measuring or qualifying your skills in your skills section. So some common offenders are excellent communication skills or strong presentation skills. It always seems to be around a communication thing. In any case, accomplishments are going to do the job for you. They're going to reinforce and communicate your level of strength in a certain skill. So you don't need to qualify any skills in your skills section. You just need to list the skills. So presentation or public speaking. So just list the skill. You don't need to say how good you are at it or not. And another thing that's subtle but makes eyes roll are using descriptors for yourself that are really difficult to actually use to self-identify. And the things that immediately come to mind for me are things like visionary and thought leader. It's really hard for you to make the assessment that you are those things. It's really backed up by the work that you've done, your body of work. So I would really refrain from using visionary or thought leader as descriptors for yourself. Okay, so let's talk about parts of the resume that make eyes bleed. And again, feel free to include your questions in the chat if you have any. I realized that probably July 4th was a bad day to have office hours, but I wanted to keep the Saturday cadence going. So I decided to still have it on Saturday. Hopefully next Saturday, more people will be available. But of course, this is always recorded and available on my channel indefinitely. So you can always refer back to it if you have to go or you just aren't here. Okay, so let's talk about eyes bleeding. All right, so using bullets all the time. That really is hard for a reader to look at, filter through, get the good stuff from. It really is kind of actually painful, believe it or not, for a reader to go through nothing but bullets. And as we know, bullets are used to highlight accomplishments, highlight the best stuff. And so when you're using all bullets, you're effectively highlighting everything, which means nothing is standing out. It's like highlighting an entire page of a textbook. You may have heard me say that before. Is my favorite analogy for overuse of bullets. So what you want to do is prioritize what you want to say in the bullets. And if you have more than 5 bullets per roll, I would recommend using subcategories to break them up. You need to give the reader a bit of a break as they're going through your resume. Just a little line of white space will do it. So subcategories will really help break up a lot of information if you have more than 5 bullets, and that should really do it. All right, and in terms of paragraphs, so another thing that really makes eyes bleed is like huge chunks of text. So when you are using paragraphs, I would recommend using paragraphs that are 3 to 4 lines max. And just, yeah, don't try and be as concise as possible in paragraphs, and that should also help the reader. Hello, Torch Girl. What are your thoughts on tech skills section? There are things I've used, but wouldn't consider a power user, but even being familiar seems worth something sometimes. Can I say basic HTML, for example? Yes, you absolutely can. So a couple things that I've done in the past is where a client has basic level skills in a certain technology, but it's an important tech for their target role, I will say in brackets basic, or I will also include or consider including a subcategory of skills where it says currently learning, and then HTML, let's say, or currently studying HTML, so that it's clear and you're being transparent about your level, and they can assess quickly whether or not you have that skill. Conversely, I have a terrible time gauging level of proficiency, would prefer not to have to say expert. Yeah, don't say expert. Earlier in the stream, I was saying qualifying isn't really necessary in your skills sections. In case in fact, I'm sorry, I would say avoid it. Your accomplishments will back up your skill level, and it's not your job to assess your skill level, but where it is, in this case, a skill that you're currently learning, then I would say that you're currently learning it, or that it's basic or intermediate or whatever from a tech perspective. I just wouldn't say expert or excellent or strong or things like that to qualify a skill. That's just not necessary. I hope that helps. If it doesn't, let me know what other questions you have. Thanks for your question. Okay, so back to eyes bleeding on our resume. So like I was saying, huge chunks of text, very hard to get through. Large paragraphs, hard to get through. Aim for paragraphs that are 3 to 4 lines. Lots of different fonts is also painful for the reader. So my recommendation would be a singular font all throughout your resume, or if you want to use a couple different fonts, that's okay, but I would reserve one font for your headers and subheaders and one font for the actual body of the resume. Otherwise, the differences in fonts, just really hard to digest for a reader. Thank you, Torch Girl. Okay. All right. And another thing that's really hard on the eyes are like crazy colors, or a crazy amount of colors, like all the colors of the rainbow. We really don't want that in a resume. But pops of colors are okay on a resume. And in fact, they can jazz it up a little bit. But you need to be a bit careful with colors. You need to make sure that the colors you're using will work both digitally as well as printed, because on occasion, someone will print a resume. A recruiter or hiring manager will print it. So you need to make sure that it can look good on a screen as well as look good on a piece of paper. And likely on that piece of paper, they're printing in grayscale or black and white. So the color is not going to show up anyway. But you need to make sure the shade can. I know this is so much to think about when it comes to colors. So colors that tend to work well, printed and digitally, are rich or dark greens, blues, purple. What does not behave well, printed or digitally, are pinks, peach, pastels, like a mauve wouldn't work. Anything that's kind of on the light side, that's just not going to work in print or digital. So try to avoid that. But again, rich, dark tones, that will work just fine. Yeah, but just a final note around color is it's not necessary to use any color whatsoever. You can, of course, feel free to use pops of color, but you don't have to. Black font is totally fine and the standard. So that's really what I wanted to touch on about keeping eyes and attention on resumes, and also making sure that you're not making eyes bleed or overwhelming the reader. So that was really quick. I am happy to continue taking questions if you have them. I know that I had a couple questions come in by LinkedIn, so maybe I'll touch on one of those. So Carrie had asked me about a section on LinkedIn where LinkedIn automatically pulls in at the top of, I think at the top of your profile, she was asking about, LinkedIn automatically pulls in your most recent employer or current employer and most recent or current education, and it will list it at the top of your profile. So Carrie, if you're here, I might be misunderstanding the question, so please let me know. But yeah, so that's something that LinkedIn has been doing for a little while now. So when you're updating your profiles, you want to make sure that you don't have much control over what company it's pulling, because current or most recent work is what it's going to take, and there's no way that you can really move things around unless roles are concurrent. For the education, you have lots of flexibility there. You can totally move your education around. So let's say you went to an Ivy League school for continuing education and you really want that to show up in the header of your profile, you can make that happen by moving the education around. In order to move the education around, I believe you have to remove dates, but I did notice not long ago I was able to move around education without removing dates. So try it either way, but you can force LinkedIn to pick up whatever education you want in that header. You just need to make sure it's the first in your list of education. And also, I have a video on rejigging the education section, and I will put that in the description of this video as well, so you can refer to it. Pat, hi Pat. You have a question about strategies when a career site has more than one job that one could be interested in. 2 totally separate cover letters, 1 for each position mentioned in the letter that I'm interested in more than 1 opening. Thoughts? Welcome. Yes, I would do that. I wouldn't get in the habit of applying to tons of multiple roles at the same company, because it might be noticed that or might be perceived as a lack of focus. But yes, I would go ahead and clarify why you're applying to 2 separate roles. Let's say it's related, like a customer service role and an account manager role. I can see some similarities between that, or a sales role and an account manager role. Definitely big time similarities between those. So it's fair that you would apply to both of those roles, but definitely, yes, clarify those in those separate and unique cover letters for each role. Torch Girl, actually 1 more question. Okay, including a tech skills section. I go back and forth about including it at the beginning or end before education. Current thought is it's less important, so later is better. It depends. Can you tell me what your target role is? And just type it in the chat there. Thank you, Pat. Let me know if you have any other questions. Anyway, as we wait for Torch Girl's target role, wanted to talk about, I did receive a question about trying to stand out in the Canadian job market if you are a newcomer. So it's very important. The most important thing with your resume as a newcomer is that it is following Canadian standards. So there's quite a bit of variety between international markets or overseas markets and the Canadian market. And so you need to really familiarize yourself with what works in the Canadian market, because if someone receives a resume in a format that's very foreign or unexpected, that can really throw off their resume review game, and they may not know where to start, may not know where to look, and they'll get overwhelmed. So really make sure that you're clear on what the standard is. And this really goes for any market. So be very clear on what the standard or the expectation is for resumes in the market to which you're applying. Super important. All right, more stuff in the chat. Thank you. Pranita, where do we put the target position in the resume? Okay, so you can put the target position, so the position to which you're applying, in the title of the resume. So my format recommendation is name, title, contact information. So I do recommend that you name the target role, the role to which you're applying. I recommend that you update your title with every single job application. So putting a title will do a couple things. It will identify the role to which you're applying, as well as prepare the reader for reviewing your resume. So let's say it's account manager. I don't know why that's my favorite example today. So let's say it's an account manager title. So as I'm reviewing this resume, I know that I'm supposed to be looking at it through the lens or qualifying it or evaluating it through the lens of someone who is applying to an account manager role. So of course, that would also mean that your accomplishments are account manager centric as well. So yeah, again, to recap, name, title, which is the target job, the job to which you're applying, and then your contact information, or you could go name, contact information, title. It really doesn't matter. Just make sure it's at the top of the page. Okay, Torch Girl. Okay, usually project coordinator or similar, not highly tech focused. Okay, so if it's not highly tech focused, then I would say put it on page 2. As long as the skills are there, it's not hugely, like, as long as they're there on your resume, whether it's page 1 or page 2, it's not going to cause too much of a problem being on page 2. But yeah, if your target roles are not that tech focused, for sure put those on page 2, and you can just list them. Okay. Would I recommend JobScan for what exactly, Pranita? Please just let me know in the chat. Okay, Torch Girl. So you broaden your scope. So you've got project coordinator roles that you're applying to. So that would be one type of resume. And you're also going for admin. That would be another type of resume. But there's many different types of roles in admin. So that could be multiple resumes depending on what admin type of role you're applying to. If it's, like administrative assistant, that's one type of resume. If it's executive assistant, that's totally different. So just be really clear on your target jobs or the jobs to which you're applying, as well as review a lot of those target job postings to make sure that you're properly building your resumes. Isla, how much contact info is needed? Not much. So city and province or state, phone number, email, LinkedIn URL. And that's all that I would include in the contact information. Pranita, for JobScan for tailoring the resume, I'm still not quite sure. Are you meaning their ATS tool, their ATS review tool? Let me know. Torch Girl, I feel like I just need to have them there as more an FYI than a focus, meaning your tech skills. Sure, yeah, that makes sense. Pranita, yes, the ATS tool. Yes, the ATS tool is fine to use on JobScan, but you shouldn't basically live and die by that tool is what I'll say. So please keep in mind that humans make hiring decisions, humans review resumes. The longer I do this job, the more I realize that an ATS is not used very heavily in the hiring process. It's very common for recruiters to review literally every single resume that comes across their desk for a job application. So again, don't live and die by that ATS assessment. It is a good complement to the overall resume building process, but you should be prioritizing the human reader ahead of what's coming out of that ATS evaluation tool on JobScan. So again, use it in partnership with making sure your resume reads really, really well. Okay, great. Any other questions that I can help you guys with? I know it's a holiday today, so I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to make sure that I'm addressing all of your questions. And we will be back next Saturday as well. And probably it will be easier for people to attend because it won't be a holiday. Okay, so with that, thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate it. I hope you found this helpful, and feel free to join us next Saturday, and I look forward to taking your questions then. All the best to you. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Thank you.